Hi, I'm Brandon Briscoe, and welcome to another episode of the Postscript, Living Faith Bible Institute's weekly podcast and YouTube series devoted to interviewing pastors and professors from LFBI and across the Living Faith Fellowship. And if you're familiar with this podcast and you've listened long enough, you've heard interviews that I've done with Pastor Mark Trotter. He is a huge influence on this fellowship and on LFBI. He was instructor for many years in our classes. He has preached at many of our conferences, the conferences that the fellowship does every year. We've promoted those through LFBI quite often. And he's also an author, and some of the books that he's written are actually textbooks. They're resource books within LFBI. And so you've likely heard about Mark Trotter, and he's, personally impacted my life in a way that I'll never be able to repay. But a lot of you aren't familiar with his son, Justin Trotter. And Justin is a dear friend of mine, and I'm so grateful for him. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share him with you today. We're going to have a conversation about what it was like to grow up with his dad and the influence that his dad had on him. But we're also going to talk about his own personal ministry and what God's doing in his life and what ministry and vision looks like for him personally as a pastor in Callie Harbin in Georgia. And so with that, I'm privileged to introduce you to my dear friend, Justin. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Man, thanks for having me, bro. I'm honored that you would ask, for real.
Well,
so, yeah.
We've been trying to get you out here in Kansas City to hang out for a while.
Right.
And it finally happened. We're filming this at Mission Focus, so you're here. It's convenient, and we can do it.
I'm ashamed to admit that this is my first Mission Focus. How that happened, I don't know. In all church, this past year was my first time in Kansas City. So how... I literally had to be trying to avoid you guys in order
it feels
to.
That way.
It kind of, Are you still a little hurt?
I'm a little hurt. I'm a little bitter. But like your dad came out here every year.
Yes.
To preach.
Yes.
But he was really going everywhere and preaching. How do you decide where you're going to go?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's tough.
Well, he was at Certainty so much too, and then that was kind of like hometown, and so we would always make that one, and so this one was always a little hard. So anyway.
Well, we are thankful that you're here. And you're going to be preaching at Living Faith Lee Summit this weekend. And man, it just feels right. We're so glad that you're here. And this last year, you lost your dad. And that's been a really big deal. And everybody's felt that. It's been felt fellowship wide. We all loved your dad so much. People who are familiar with the show have seen him on episodes of the show. And so I just kind of want to start before we get into, because I want to ask about ministry. There's all kinds of things I want to ask about. But I think people do want to hear from your heart what this last year has been like since you lost your dad, and what your family has been going through, and if anything, it'll just inform us on how to pray for you. But what's this last year been like?
Yeah, man, it's hard to put into words because it's almost one of those things to where I think everybody on some level envisions the possibility of tragic things happening in their life, right? We try not to think about it, but inevitably you find yourself thinking what life would look like under these circumstances,
Right.
And man, you really, until I actually lived that, it was hard to comprehend prior to that. Because I think I'd even said to my wife at points in years past, I said, man, just knowing how I felt about my dad, the way I loved my dad, and just seeing age happen, seeing cancer happen, and just things like that. I just remember telling her, this is going to be one sad brother.
Yeah.
And man, that was amplified even more than I could probably imagine. There were moments where I felt like I might be the most brokenhearted dude on planet Earth. I'm sure I wasn't, but boy, I felt like I can't imagine that anybody else right this second feels quite this bad. There were moments of that,
Right.
In the midst of those moments and coming out of those moments, the way the Lord showed up was just something. It was beyond belief, Not that it took all the grieving away or that it took everything away, certainly not. But, you know, I had a friend that was like, listen, man, God's showing up and you're going to know when he does.
Yeah.
And it was, and he showed up and I knew when he did. And it was, that was also a supernatural thing. The low was lower than I could have imagined.
Yeah.
The comfort from the Lord was greater than I could have imagined as well.
And do you mind, you share with me a little bit about how God showed up? I don't know if that's too personal, but do you mind sharing a little bit about that story, about how, like, in the midst of your grief, God came through? And I think people would be blessed to hear that if you're willing to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to share. It was, you know, so it was just kind of crazy how, you know, the Lord works. From Ohio, I moved to Georgia when I was still actually 19.
Yeah.
And so it's been a minute. Mm-hmm. I know you can't tell, but it's been a minute. And so, you know, when I moved,
you have the hair of a sprightly 15-year-old.
Sprightly, yeah. So, I'll take it. That's what I was shooting for.
It just keeps you looking young, man. You look young.
Well, you know, like my dad used to say, it can turn gray, just don't turn loose.
His never did. It was holding on.
It was holding on for dear life. Yeah, it was turning gray, but it was holding on. So anyway, we'll hope for that. But yeah, so you know, so when I moved, my dad basically went into his office literally as I backed out of the driveway. Mm-hmm. He went into his office and he just started writing me a letter.
Yeah.
And it was a letter that he never actually gave to me because he had never completely finished it the way that he wanted to. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of raw feelings in that moment of just, you know, loving on his son and that type of thing. And so it was a few months after he passed that my mom had stumbled on that.
She was going through stuff.
Yeah. We found some interesting stuff. That one of the most interesting things, you know. But you know, she pulled that out. And
did she know that this letter existed?
She did, and in fact, I think I even knew that it existed, but I hadn't. It wasn't totally on our radar. We weren't thinking about it.
Right,
I remember.
You had a lot going on.
Yeah. And so when she brought that up again, it was like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember him saying at some point down the line that he had a letter that he wrote to me that he's going to give to me someday. Mm-hmm. You know, and so anyway, it was, like I say, about 3 months after the fact. And, you know, it felt like he had one last thing to say. Mm. You know, and so it was just one of those things, dude, where it was like every 2 sentences, you know, you got to take a minute to wipe away the tears to read the rest, you know, but just him loving on me, you know, and just being the loving father that he was, you know. And so the letter was just full of that, probably 3 or 4 pages. You know, certainly that I'll cherish for forever. But boy, it was just as much as I wept reading it, it was such a joy.
Yeah.
You know, to again feel like it was almost like God saved it. Mm-hmm. We didn't really get last words or anything like that, and it was just like one last thing, you know. So yeah, that was cool.
And a point of healing, like it allowed you to get that moment with your dad that was robbed from you so suddenly. Yeah. I mean, I think about your dad and I think about the way that he passed. It was like he was a man of such physical, emotional, and spiritual strength.
Yeah.
That it almost seemed like if any man could live forever, it would be that guy. And then it happened so quick,
so fast.
Right? Like it was like, I almost feel like he kind of knew. Right before that last surgery, he kind of knew, but no one thought that it was that like after the surgery it was just going to be like boom, like he you know, he just wasn't the same after that, and so the idea of you getting a letter, I mean, dude, what every person would love, one last letter from a loved one. But you got that gift.
Yes, for sure, a gift. I'll cherish forever, you know, and it just felt of the Lord, you know, that He was just shining down in that moment. There was a reason that He never gave it to me. Yeah. You know, it would have meant a ton while He was here.
Right.
But meaning even more when He's not, to actually say it with His mouth anymore. Yeah. You know, and so to have that hit you for the first time in those moments, it was just, It was
And then,
special.
Dude, and then this crazy story about your daughter.
Yeah.
So wild. So can you, do you mind sharing that?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure,
okay.
sure. So I'm at the house, I work from home, and I'm sitting there in my office, and I'm listening to one of my dad's messages, which I do regularly.
Yeah.
And so this is a message from, I don't even remember, it was probably 20 years old,
Right.
and I'm listening to it for whatever reason. And so my wife and my daughter Berkeley come up, and I'd known that Berkeley's 7, and she had been inquiring about salvation for a little while. And, we were kind of the parents that are nervous that we're going to, we could have gotten a confession out of her years ago if we wanted it. Right.
Premature decision.
Yes, exactly. But we just wanted her to really come to that point. And so, my wife comes up with her, and they sit down, and he's like, well, Daddy, I think Berkeley's ready to get saved. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I paused the message, and so I just asked her some questions that are just making sure she's understanding everything about the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Just making sure she understands everything.
Yeah.
And she was understanding everything, giving all the right answers. And so, ultimately we sat down, and we, in Berkeley got saved, right on the spot. Yeah, it was a beautiful day. We're all in tears, and it's just
for a dad. There's nothing better for a dad.
Oh yeah,
just than to see his kids come to Christ.
Oh man, yeah, exactly. She's my oldest, so that was our first experience with that. Man, what a blessing! And just so we're all just sitting there crying. It was September 24th of this year that happened. And so, we're just kind of rejoicing and just having a moment there, hugging it out, the three of us. And so they end up going back downstairs, and I'm gonna continue listening where I was, and I press play in the message that I was listening to. And probably within about 15 minutes of hitting play, my dad starts talking about salvation, and he starts going into his salvation, his testimony essentially. And he says, for me, it was September 24th, and we were like, whoa. And I paused it, and I was looking at the date, because at the time I wasn't even cognizant of what day it was. And I certainly wasn't thinking about what my dad's spiritual birthday was either.
Sure.
And so I grabbed my phone, and I was just like, I couldn't believe it,
Wow.
And it was just like, I don't know, man. It just felt like that the Lord was just loving on us a little bit,
Yeah.
And
what it's like it's at some level, it's like this superficial coincidence, right? Like it's just, it just happened to be, and maybe it was just happened to be.
Yes.
But man, what a great reminder of how God has been at work in your family, and like it was the decision that your dad made. On September 24th, what year was it?
Well, it was, so we did the math, because we were kind of having fun with it, but it was 49 years to the day
before.
And so we're seven. She was 7. So we started having fun with that too, so it was 49 years to the day prior to Berkeley getting saved. And just the fact that she had been talking for a while, and we kind of were nervous to have her, and so then that was just whatever it was, man, the Lord drawing her on that day. And so it was a special
that's
day.
Beautiful. And it's all of those things that do help us see the bigger picture of what God's doing. And so I really hope that, a year isn't enough, it's something that you deal, it's a scar you deal with the rest of your life. But at the same time, our prayer as a fellowship for you is that you'd get continued healing, and that you would only be inspired to serve the Lord that much more, rigorously.
Absolutely. And that's exactly how I've tried to channel the grief.
Yeah. That's good.
It's a therapeutic thing. We're just going to go harder now.
Suffering is the true commonality of every Christian believer. And for us, suffering does different things than it does for the lost, And so
yes,
our suffering is only just a catalyst for seeking and saving the lost. So
that's right.
Well,
that's right. Exactly.
Bro, I love you, dude. I'm so thankful that you're here.
I appreciate it, bro. I love you too, man. I appreciate you.
And a lot of people, we've heard your dad on the show, and I know that a lot of people have heard your dad preach.
Yeah.
but you are still maybe a little, like people are unfamiliar with you and your story. So let's talk about you for just a minute. I want to hear about what it was like growing up and about your own salvation and growing up with your dad. What was that like? So man, if you could share that kind of stuff with us, I think people would love to know what that was like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, obviously my dad was a pastor my whole life. He was a pastor before I was born. So my whole life, I've been the PK and all that stuff. And, and I've said, and some people listening may have heard me say this before, but I've always said, man, as great of a pastor as he was an even better dad. Yeah. As great of a preacher as he was an even better dad. And so it was just, quite honestly, until we lost him, my life has been a fairy tale. Yeah. It really has. And it was always such a cool thing for me, because my dad's story is, I think he's even told on this podcast is that he didn't grow up in a Christian home like that, right? And so for him to be, basically first one out of his family like that, and just for the barnacles to be so far removed, to where I basically grew up in the Cleaver household. Yeah. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that was your mom, my life.
Let's just say it right now. Your mom seems to be the perfect mom.
She
had to have been.
She is. Oh, for
was
sure.
There like cookies every day when you came home from school and stuff like that? That's what I imagine.
Right. Pretty much. Well, I mean, it was a fairy tale, how sweet she is that you guys see is how she was at home.
I'm sure.
So I was blessed beyond measure. I recognize it now. I recognized it then. It was just how gracious God was that somehow I ended up in this family. That was how I felt and still feel, and so, man, what a blessing. But yeah, dude, it was, my dad is my hero. He always was. And he was a loving father. The time at the church, the time through my childhood was, I can't say enough positive things about it. Yeah. I was saved. I was saved at 7 years old as well. While my dad was preaching, it was certainly a moment I'll never forget. And he left during the service and we went up to his office and kneeled down together at a chair that he had out in front of the office, and so it was a beautiful thing and something I'll never forget.
And you grew up going, obviously, where your dad pastor was, most people know First Baptist New Philly.
Yes.
And you described it as like, it was like your playground, like the church was like, and the people, it was your family. Yeah. And you just ran around and you were there playing basketball all the time and perfecting your jump shot. And
that's right.
You just lived there. It was wonderful.
Oh yeah, for sure. And, and it still feels like that, it's still like that when I go back. I mean, those people are family, and it still feels a lot like home. Obviously Georgia's home, but it's still, we were there for so long and so many unbelievable and fond memories. And all the memories as a kid pretty much get funneled back to the church.
Oh yeah, sure.
And so it was.
And so that obviously your dad had a huge impression on you. The church being at home was really wonderful, but you decided to leave and move to Georgia. What was the reasoning behind that? Like, at the time, when you left, what was the reasoning behind?
Yeah. So when I left, it was basically, there was a land developer and a real estate guy out there that was moving and shaking and all those things. And he was gracious enough to offer to teach me the ropes. Yeah. And so I was still 19 and I was figuring things out and I wasn't sure what the Lord had for me. I wasn't sure a lot of things. I felt like I knew what the Lord had for me ultimately, but in the short term, I didn't know what He had for me. And so it was like, hey, let's try this thing out in Georgia, and in worst case scenario, I just move on back home. Nothing lost, Right. And so I convinced my best buddy to move with me, and we moved out there together. He ended up moving back. I stayed, and and obviously I'm still there to this day. And so real estate and work is essentially what got me there. And of course, the Lord had my wife there in his own timing and those type of things as well.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So, I think many people who are part of the fellowship are aware that you were ordained this last year. And I know between you and I, we've had conversations about how God had that on your heart for a long time, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about the story of how you got to the place where you were ready and God had prepared you for that.
Yeah. I mean, it was the type of thing that, since I've been, probably a teenager, there's been at least a belief within me that somehow, some way, I was going to end up in vocational ministry.
Right.
And throughout the years, I didn't know when, I didn't know how, I didn't know where, I didn't know any of those things.
Right.
But there was just something inside of me that was, that I felt like that was where God was eventually going to have me.
Right.
And certainly something that I talked to my dad about tons of times, and man, if anything, he tried to talk me out of it more than he did talk me into it.
That was one of the things I was going to say is like, I think it's interesting anytime someone who has grown up around the pastorate and seen behind the curtain and I'm sure I know your dad probably protected you from a lot of the harder parts of ministry.
He did, yeah.
But you saw enough of it to know that it was burdensome.
Yeah.
Right. And, but then to see that and have your eyes wide open and be like, well, I still want it. That's something I desire. That's a big deal.
Right. I know. I've thought about that before too. I've sat back a few different times and said, man, I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it's like, but there's some truth to that. But I think that's what it comes down to. It comes back to the advice he gave me, which was the advice he received, which is the advice I think a bunch of people have received all through the years, which is if you can't do anything else, do that.
Yeah, I actually he said that on the show.
Oh, did he?
That exact very thing. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that was the same advice that he gave me. If you just can't see yourself continuing to do anything else, then do that, and that's how you know.
Yeah.
And so it just continued to feel like that. Of course, I continued to work my secular job and, do the real estate thing that I was doing and have continued to do, but it just always felt like that I always believed that that's what the Lord had called me to ultimately. And again, then, without going into details, we can go into details, but, God was opening doors right around the time that my dad was taking a turn for the worse.
Yeah.
We didn't realize that was the reality at the time.
Right.
But that's what it was, and so it was one of those journeys, man, to where, and I'm sure I was very flawed in the midst of it. I have no doubt. I'm a product of God's grace, 100%. The attempt is to continue to do the next right thing that I know to do, and let God take care of the rest. We can't always, God doesn't give us our 10-year plan. He doesn't inform it. Now he'll direct us to the next right step.
Yes.
Right. We acknowledge him and he directs our paths.
Yeah.
But it's not like there's no writing on the wall that here's how this is going to shake out. Here's when and all this stuff. So all you can do is by the grace of God, do the next right thing that you know to be doing or you believe you should be doing in that moment.
Your dad used to always, I'm sure you had to have heard this a million times, but I heard him occasionally when he was preaching. When I binge Mark Trotter sermons, he would often talk about the direction of one's feet. Right?
He loves that.
If your feet were directed the right way, no matter when you took a step or how would that step look like, that you are going to be heading the direction that God wants you to go. But if your feet are off just slightly, if you're slightly turned, if you're unsure, if you're to the left or to the right, you're going to end up in a place that you shouldn't be. And
that's right.
It sounds to me like, you just had your feet turned the right way, and it just took time to get. It took, there was a season of life where it just required God trying you and preparing you.
Yes. Even when things would go on in my secular job, the real estate stuff, like there was always that voice inside that was like, it's all good. God's just preparing you for what's next. He's teaching you for what's next. And that's how it always felt.
Sure.
We
all know how critical training is for the pastorate. Right? Like that's why we have LFBI. That's why we have all these training mechanisms from the work of discipleship onward. There's a sanctifying process that looks like growing in the knowledge of God's word. What does it look like for Mark Trotter's son to get trained? I mean, I would think a lot of times you probably got like a pass. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, oh, well, it's Mark Trotter's son. He must know.
He must know. Yeah. Right.
But so what does it look like? How did your dad invest in you? What did the actual training look like for you to grow in the knowledge of God's word? And like, did he give you like tips along the way? Did he nudge you like, okay, I want you to learn from this situation, or tell us, give us a little insight into that.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and it's funny because there were things like that. There were the nudges that, you know, he was doing that. Now, he wouldn't always couch it as, here's what I'm trying to teach you. He would just start doing it. You know what I mean? And so you would there was a lot that you were catching that he was very much intentionally laying down for you, you know, and you know what? There was a whole bunch of it that I hope that I was catching just watching. Yeah. You know what I mean? Just watching somebody who practices what they preach, you know, and watching somebody navigate this or navigate that and all of those things, and just watching that very real example right in front of me. Yeah. And so that right there, I mean, I don't think you can put a dollar amount on the value of having a front row seat to watch that type of thing. For sure. You know, and you know, it's funny. One of the things that I think it was big that he did that was good for me was what we kind of referenced a second ago, which was he was never pushing me in that direction. In fact, if anything, he tried to talk me out of it more than push me into it. And I think the beauty of that on some level is that I never felt like I had to go into the ministry to earn my dad's approval, or that was some sort of secret dream of his. Yeah. I never believed that. Yeah. And I still, you know, I and of course I still don't. And I think that there was a lot of value in that for me, because I felt like, you know, as he held the role father, which he is to exemplify the Heavenly Father and point me to the Heavenly Father, and that's what he was doing. And in that vein, he was loving me for however God made me and whatever God had for me, whatever that looked like. It didn't have to look like what it looked like for him. Right. And so feeling that, I think, was instrumental as well. It was huge for me, for just even feeling like that in a weird kind of way. That was part of it, I think, as well, you know, just feeling that support. Sure. Because it was never had to do it for that reason. You know, I've had people ask, you know, my dad has heard me preach. He got to hear me preach a couple times. Yeah. And it was like, oh my goodness, what must have that been like? Like, you had to have been scared to death, right? You know, him in the room of all people and this and that. And I was like, you know what's weird? I've never felt more comfortable or confident in my life, because I felt like there was somebody in that room that I knew for 100% certain had my back like nobody's business, was rooting for me like you couldn't believe, and loved me whether it stunk or whether he thought it was the greatest thing he ever heard. Sure. And to me, that was huge for me, and impactful for me as well, in a kind of backwards kind of way. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. We're going to pause right here for just a second so we can hear from one of our students from the Living Faith Bible Institute.
I'm Craig Warner. I'm the kids pastor at First Baptist Church of New Philadelphia, Ohio, and a recent graduate of the Living Faith Bible Institute. LFBI was a great chance for me to grow, to learn, to continue my education without having to take time away from my family or my own ministry. In fact, being able to take classes at my own pace ultimately allowed me to be more effective in my ministry. I can't tell you how invaluable it is for LFBI to be structured in such a way that you're encouraged to implement what you learn in ministry and not just sit on the information for yourself. It was a great experience to hear from a variety of instructors from other ministries and parts of the country in tandem with serving my local church. Through LFBI, I received a library of resources that I'll be able to reference for the rest of my life. It was curated by the experience and the countless hours of study put in by the instructors. I can't tell you how grateful I am for all those that invested in and equipped me for the work of the Lord. In addition to the information and resources, I was able to develop relationships with so many of the students and the instructors that have impacted my life in the way that I view ministry. There was a lot of info to retain, and there's still a lot that I don't know, but perhaps the greatest takeaway from LFBI is the confidence to be able to compare Scripture with Scripture and rightly divide the word of truth so that I can be certain of what God says for myself. This is an approach to the Bible that will stay with me for the rest of my life. So if anyone's interested in learning what God's Word has to say, I'd encourage you to sign up for the Living Faith Bible Institute.
To enroll for classes, visit lfbi.org. To support LFBI, please visit lfbi.org/support. The way you're describing it just makes so much sense. I'm sure that's exactly how your dad was, because in life and ministry, he wasn't the type of person to tell anybody what to do, right? He wasn't a critical spirit. Right? Like, I know that there was times he probably had to say a lot of hard things.
Right.
But man, the way that someone felt loved by him, there was an unconditional love, right? Like, which is why I think one of the reasons why so many people were drawn to him is because people always say that they felt like your dad's best friend.
Right.
Right. That's because he was that intentional. And I think it had to be all the much more as his son, feeling support, but never being pushed, never being driven, never telling you that you have to do this or have to do that. It's like, that's got to create a lot of liberty and freedom in terms of your decision making.
Yes.
I would think.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. You don't have any of those, not deciphering, why am I doing this? Am I seeking daddy's approval? All of this type of stuff.
Baggage.
Right. Because and I say that because it is definitely a thing that pastors tend to do a lot of steering with their children.
Yeah.
In that regard, for right, wrong, or indifferent. Mm-hmm. That wasn't his approach.
Right.
And it was one that I appreciated because to me it went hand in hand with, I'm accepted here, man. Yeah. I'm loved beyond measure. It isn't about that. Mm-hmm. Of course he wanted me to follow the Lord and whatever I do, but it had nothing to do with vocational ministry or whatever. It was whatever God had. Let's go for that.
Yeah, that's wonderful, man. Yeah. That's good.
So, yeah.
Every man needs that in their life, whether it comes from their actual father or from mentors in their life. It's just such a critical thing.
Yeah.
So with that, I mean, you're a pastor now, right?
Yeah.
You've been ordained and you're at Callie Harbin, which is a church in the Living Faith Fellowship. Tell us about Callie Harbin. There's probably a lot of people who've never been there or maybe unfamiliar with the church. Tell us about the church. Tell us about the culture of the church and just what it's like. Where it's in Georgia. Tell us about where it's at, community, things like that.
Right. So it's in Villa Rica, Georgia. Mm-hmm. And it is, this was a church that was planted in like the 1930s.
Okay.
So it's actually been there for quite some time. The lead pastor there currently, Corey Gordon, is a guy who, he got turned on to my dad's stuff. What's it been? 15, 20 years ago, probably now. Mm-hmm. Before he ever met him in person, actually, he started getting I think it was tapes. Yeah. So
everybody talks about the tapes.
The infamous tapes, right? So you know how long ago it was when you say tapes.
Right.
And so, he got turned on to the tapes and he was a product of that and is a product of that. And so, what a blessing it was, obviously, when the door was opening at a place like that to where, the doctrines and the ministry philosophies and all of those things, are right in line with, obviously I'm a product of my dad as well. I saw things the same way he saw them. I see things the same way he saw them. And so, it was that type of thing. And man, the people of Callie Harbin have just been wonderful, just kind, sweet souls who really have just taken us in and loved on us as their own just right from the get-go.
Right.
And that's huge, obviously. That's huge blessing. So, yeah.
That's good, man. And so what's the community in Villa Rica like? And what are the people in the church like? And maybe express to us a little bit about what the vision that you and Corey have for the church moving forward. because there's a dynamic in your guys' relationship and some expectations and goals. Maybe you can explain how that works and what your heart is for the ministry there.
Yeah, sure. So it's a rural area. It's way more country than it is city slicker.
Yeah.
It's way, it's on that end of the spectrum.
How far outside of Atlanta is that?
You're going to bring geography into this?
Oh, I just know how much you have to drive. When you're anywhere within 100 miles of Atlanta, it seems like the drive is just insane, right?
Right. On Sundays, it's not bad.
Okay.
But we are going to have to, we're about 50 minutes on Sunday right now.
Okay.
One of the goals of 2022 is for us to move a lot closer.
Yeah.
So, because Wednesday night is a little brutal.
Yeah. You told me about that drive.
Yes. Yeah. It's like almost doubled.
Is everybody asleep in the car on the way home?
Oh yeah. Well, if they have finished eating, because it's one of those things like pull through Chick-fil-A and grab this and that. And,
right.
So they end up in a chicken mac and cheese coma in the back, one of those things.
What that's like.
Yeah.
So tell us about the people there. Who is it and who are you going to minister to?
Oh yeah. I mean, we've got a lot of young couples in the church. There's actually a pretty good dynamic as far as the ages are spread out pretty good. So that's a blessing. It's good to have a little bit of all of that. And so, there's all of that there. And man, just a bunch of folks that love the word. Corey is a great preacher and he loves the word and he teaches the meat of it. And so they understand the value in that. Yeah. And so, that's been a blessing. And so, man, he's laid out, he's got everything going in the right direction. And, my hope is to continue to just build from there, together from there.
That. The goal is, Corey wants to move into the associate pastor position.
That's right. And
then he would be supporting you as the head pastor, right? So explain that.
Yeah. So exactly. So Corey has been telling the folks of Callie Harbin for a while. He's been telling them, hey, listen, guys, I'm not the guy long term. Corey has a secular job that he works as well. And he has been wanting to take more of a teaching pastor type of role. Yeah. And so he's been knowing that that's what the Lord had for him for a while. He just hasn't known who it was was going to take. Yes. Yeah. And so, so obviously we're in the midst of this now. And so what the plan is that we're essentially going to trade roles in July of 2022 is the plan. And so I've been, working as essentially an associate pastor type of role, since whenever that was, April, I guess, something like that. And so then the plan though, all along, and he had that on Front Street, and that was cool because it wasn't one of these back office things. One of these days, sure, this is going to happen. It wasn't that in that. So I was thankful for that, and that was on Front Street from the get go. Like, here's the plan. Yeah. If I think his line was, if this is coming as a surprise to you, then I'm not doing much good for you because you hadn't been listening to me anyway. Right. So so it was kind of one of those type of things.
Sounds like something Corey might say.
Yeah. So it was, so it was true. So anyway, so that was the plan, and that was what he had in mind, and then it was just a matter of God's timing and all those things. And so here we sit, and it's kind of wild,
exciting. You're on the cusp. It'd be really great actually to, a year from now, or maybe next Mission Focus, interview again and just see the progress of what God's doing in the ministry. Because I know you have obviously, the way so many of us in the fellowship do, you have a heart for discipleship and training, and your desires for prayer and these critical things. And I know God's going to use you. He's used Corey, and now he's going to use you, and it'll be exciting to see what God does.
Yeah, man, I'd love to do that. Yeah, by the grace of God, that will be the case, and we'll continue to grow and continue to do obviously have the same philosophies as you guys, reproduce, the whole reproducing thing, and go on and say that 10 times. Right. But that's the goal. That's the goal. I said before, before this door opened, that I was praying about what it may look like to plant a church where I live currently. Obviously, like I said, I'm about 15 minutes away. And so we're praying about that. And my thing the whole time is I was like, if we're just going to plant this thing and host nice services, I'm out.
Yeah.
But if we're going to plant this thing and we're going to be a part of something that's actually functioning as the body of Christ, is reproducing itself and is in the community and is evangelizing and discipling, and we're going to do that and function that way, I'm all in. That's all I want to do. I'm all in on that one. Yeah, but if we're just going to host nice services and gain a bunch of knowledge, that I'm out on that. Yeah. I'll just keep doing real estate.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Amen to all that. And I pray that's the heartbeat of all the Living Faith Fellowship churches is to be church planting churches, reproducing. Yeah. So I do want to address what it's like to be a Cavs fan. Okay. So here's the deal. So after being 20 years in Atlanta area, do you have allegiance to the Hawks? Or are you still a homer and you're just like, you're rooting for the Cavs? What's that like?
Yes. Okay. So I will start with, Ohio State Buckeyes through and through. Okay. Well, so that's
anybody that's come within 100 yards of you or your dad recognize that you guys are Buckeyes.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. That's through and through. I mean, I'm slightly ashamed to admit that the loyalties don't lie quite as strong with the other teams in Ohio.
You've given all of your energy.
That's right. That's what it is. That's what it is. All of my energy has gone there. The NBA for me has always been about a player. So like even when I was in Ohio, it was all about Jordan. Right?
Sure.
So I'm following I'm a Bulls guy.
That's not right.
And so it's wrong. I know it's kind of wrong. It's got to be carnal on some level.
It's absolutely carnal.
But I'm kind of a Curry guy now. And so I like watching.
Yeah. Oh, well, who doesn't like watching?
I mean, but Trae Young, Atlanta, so
Trae Young's exciting.
Yeah.
You should get behind, I want to right now just intervene and say you need to get behind Trae Young and you need to be an Atlanta Hawks fan.
You know what? We are supporting Trae. My son got a Trae Young shirt for Christmas. We are going to, my gift for Christmas was I'm taking my two oldest to the Warriors-Hawks game.
Oh, that's going to be amazing.
That's going to be, I'm very excited. Now, the shame of it is I don't know that that might be the only team I can't root for the Hawks over them for.
Wow. That'll change.
I know.
As your son grows up and he loves the Hawks.
Right.
And Trae Young gets
and
you guys
Steph retires.
Yeah. That'll change.
Right. Yes.
But the 90s NBA is one of the things that we've connected over, right?
Yeah. Yes, we're from the same. We're from the same era. We had the same loves and passions back then. Yeah. So yeah.
And I think one of the very first conversations you and I ever had was about Mark Price.
Oh, yes, that's right. Because I had a shirt on of Mark Price.
It was amazing.
Yes. Yes. I bumped into him at a Sonny's 10 years ago.
What's Sonny's?
It's barbecue.
Is it barbecue?
Yeah. It's probably a cuss word for Kansas. In Georgia, actually. I bumped into him in Georgia. Weird. So he played at Georgia Tech. And so
Sonny's is just terrible barbecue in Georgia.
Right. Exactly. Compared to what you guys have, I think you account. Now, it was my dad's favorite. And so, you have to at least give it a little bit, yes. Yeah. But to you guys, barbecue connoisseurs as you guys are, probably would not fit the bill. It would probably fall woefully short.
Probably not.
But
I'm just walking Mark Price.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. I was walking through and I'm like, hey. So I went up and interrupted his meal. I'm sure he appreciated that. And
you did?
I did.
That's bold. Was he nice?
Super nice. Yeah. I was just told him, hey, man, I grew up in Ohio, grew up watching you, enjoyed it, always appreciated it. He was a believer,
Yeah, he's from Oklahoma originally.
Oh, is he? I didn't even know that.
Because someone recently told me that they knew him from college.
Oh, really?
Or they knew him somehow through,
Okay, well, I'll be doggone.
But he's a believer.
Yes, so I just said always appreciated the fact that you had a good testimony and stuff like that. My mom and dad were always like, Mark Price should be your favorite player. And as a kid, I'm 8 years old and I'm like, but Michael Jordan's the man.
Right. I guess he's okay. Mark Price is okay.
He's good. I like him. Yeah. He's good. But have you seen Michael Jordan fly?
That's great. Well, that's cool. Did you get his autograph? Did you ask for it?
I did not. No. And it was really before the selfie days. And I think he had barbecue in his teeth. And so anyway.
That would have been a great picture.
That would have been awesome.
Oh, yeah. Well.
Yeah. I got a selfie with Steve Nash, not Mark Price.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, just walking down the street. There's Steve Nash.
That's better, actually.
Yeah, he was better than Mark Price, we have to admit.
Yeah, he's really good. I'd like to have seen, I wish he would have played in this era.
Yes.
He would have shot more threes.
Yes. Yes.
That would have been interesting.
It would have.
Okay, so our listeners have no interest in that. But I felt like we should do it just to make record of our shared love of basketball.
Absolutely. There's at least a 10% that maybe could appreciate that.
There's a small amount of our listenership who would be like, yes, 90s NBA, please, more of that. You guys should start another podcast.
Right. I'm talking about 90s
devoted
basketball.
to that.
Right. All the females have already shut it off.
Right.
So they haven't heard this
so
part.
Let's switch gears because I've got one more really important question to ask you and I want you to talk about.
Yeah.
So WedStrong.
Yes.
WedStrong was a conference that your dad put on every year for several years. Your dad is passionate about marriages. And so you're carrying that torch. And so WedStrong 2021 just happened a month ago. Tell us about WedStrong for people who have never heard of it and tell us what the vision of that conference is. It's one of the 5 conferences that we offer as a fellowship.
Yeah, for sure. So, my dad was passionate about marriages. He had, some incredible teaching on marriage that, rocked many people's world. Mm-hmm. And, the way he puts it, and I actually played a video clip of him saying this at WedStrong this year.
Yeah.
But the way he puts it, the passion may have started because of growing up as a kid. He always feared that his parents were going to get divorced. And that was always on, he'd pray. He basically, the way he puts it in that video clip is he wasn't saved and he knew next to nothing other than he believed there had to be a God. And so he prayed every night that his parents wouldn't get divorced as a kid. And so some of the passion came from that. It's funny because I even remember as when I was a kid, I remember one time my dad asking me, he said, "Hey, do you ever worry that me and your mom are going to get a divorce?"
Because it was just something that when he was young, it was always on his mind.
Exactly. And I said, "Nope, never crossed my mind."
Wow.
And so he was like, "Okay, cool." He said, because I was always a concern of mine when I was your age, and I just wanted to put your mind at ease if it ever crossed your mind that you don't have anything to worry about, buddy. So it was kind of one of those type of things. Okay,
so before we get, so I had your dad on the show to talk about marriage.
Yeah.
Right? And he would not admit, I was trying to corner him. I'll admit this now. I was trying to corner him because I wanted to know what it was like for him and your mom to work through arguments.
Oh.
Right? And he sure as heck on the show made it sound like they never argued one time.
If they did, I was not privy to this.
Which is amazing. Okay, which speaks to the principles that your dad carried with him.
Yeah.
And which is why he was a gold mine for information about what it meant to be a good husband and a good wife.
Right. Yes. So exactly. So yeah, man, he's got a gold mine of teachings on that. Mm-hmm. And obviously that was what he was teaching at the WedStrong conferences. Yeah. And so obviously when my dad passed, we had great concerns over, what happens with some of these things that he has put so much work towards, mm-hmm. And the thought of it falling to the ground was, almost more than you could bear, So anyway, by the grace of God, the fellowship rallied around the idea of carrying it on and supported it. And so we're super grateful for that. But basically, what the WedStrong Marriage Conference is, this past year we had it in Nashville. We usually have it in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So it's usually 2 weeks after Thanksgiving and 2 weeks before Christmas. Mm-hmm. And so we've tried to find a semi-neutral ground to where so many of the churches from the fellowship can get there.
Yeah, because we got churches all over the U.S.
Yes.
Finding a central location's important so that people can drive there without a lot of burden.
Exactly. Yeah. It's important and it's challenging. And so we're, and of course you're trying to find a location where is a desirable destination.
Yeah, you don't want to end up in like Boonville, nowhere.
Right, exactly.
There's no draw.
There's no draw there. Yeah, we're going to sit around and, look at the stars.
Right.
So
you landed, this year you guys were in Nashville.
Right.
Yeah.
We were in Nashville and that we may may do Nashville again.
Yeah.
Just because of the proximity to a lot of the churches. It's a pretty decent spot. But anyway, cool. But what WedStrong is about is certainly it's about biblical teaching on marriage, first and foremost. But, it isn't a conference where you just sit there with teaching all day long.
Sure, it's not sterile.
That's right.
Yeah.
And part of the goal isn't just to teach, it's to actually give you time away with your wife or your spouse and give you time away to where you guys can hang out and bond and you guys can just get away, right? And of course, a lot of times people use that to hang out with other couples as well and all those things, right? But there's a ton of built-in free time because that's part of it. It's not just teaching, it's let's get away, let's have fun and enjoy time with your spouse.
Yeah.
So, this year we did something different. We played the newlywed game to kick it off, so we did
that looked like a lot of fun.
Oh, it was.
Your panel looked, it was every kind of person on that panel. Right. It was really good.
Oh man. And we were left with some classic sound bites and one-liners and oh my goodness, it was hilarious. But anyway, so we did that. We did a breakout session where my mom spoke to the ladies. I can't tell you how many ladies have come up to me and been like, that was my favorite session of the week. And this past WedStrong, we had, speaking of going through my dad's old stuff. So, we're going through my dad's stuff and we found a file and it said, put in file for WedStrong 2021. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, you are kidding me. And so anyway, so long story short, for this past WedStrong, what I did was I grabbed that message he intended to preach in WedStrong 2021 and attempted to honor him and give him one last crack at us on marriage.
Yeah.
And I preached the message that he intended to preach on in WedStrong 2021. And so that was a cool privilege for me to be able to do.
Man, that's great.
So we did that this year, but we'll continue to, by the grace of God, everybody was just so positive and encouraging.
I've heard great things.
Spirit, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
The spirit in there was just wonderful. And, we're excited to do it again next year and hope it continues to impact folks. I know that the folks impacted their marriages. There's a lot of people there that, the reason that they're there isn't because their marriage is in shambles. Is because they don't want it to eventually get there, right? They understand the importance of that relationship in the eyes of the Lord. That's right.
To take time away and to sit under good teaching together without any of the burden of life, just to get together and hear about what a godly marriage looks like. Set your eyes on the right thing.
Yes, exactly. If you're, you may be guilty like me, but it seems to be that, when we're in a similar stage of life with our kids and things like that, but it seems to be that the number one, human relationship that we're to prioritize ends up being the easiest one to push to the back burner, where you'll be in the same.
You take it for granted.
Yes. And once the kids, this is done and the kids and this and that and the other thing's done, then me and you will have some quality time,
Yeah, we'll have time to go to sleep.
Right.
Watch 10 minutes of The Office and then
fall asleep on the couch.
Right.
Yeah, right. Right, exactly.
It's not good.
It's not good. Right, exactly. So this is just that time to prioritize that relationship and give it its due, the importance, of course, that it has in the eyes of the Lord as well. And so, we hope to continue to carry that on. And so, it's been really good.
Like I said, people have said great things about this last year. I know it was difficult. I know it meant a lot to carry that torch. I know that it was a new work for you to own this kind of thing, put on a conference. I mean, what the heck?
Oh, right? Yeah.
That's not an easy thing to do.
No, it wasn't.
And so we're thankful for Callie Harbin for really getting behind that and for you choosing to do it. And I know we're months and months, when this airs, we'll be months and months away from the next one, but people should kind of in their mind and in their calendar determine, hey, I'd really like to get there and be a part of it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I'd encourage you to do it. I think you will enjoy it and be blessed and be challenged. It's a, mark your calendar. It will most likely be that in between Thanksgiving and Christmas time. We're breaking our necks to try to keep it as affordable as possible. It's very challenging.
Nowadays.
It is, everything keeps going up in price.
Right.
And you're trying to make it as nice as you can for anyway. So it's one of those type of challenges.
I mean, again, what do you place value in? Is your marriage worth that? And if it is, then it's a cost that you can count.
Sure. Yep.
Well,
absolutely.
Dude, I'm so grateful for our friendship.
Me too, bro.
I'm so thankful that you're here with us at the missions conference. I'm so thankful to spend time with you and for hanging out with me and doing an episode of the show.
Dude, well, I'm blessed to be here, bro. I really do. Thanks for having me on. I'm honored and humbled that you'd asked me to be on the show for real. And it's a blessing to be here. I love you and appreciate you too, man.
Well, and we'll aim to have you back again sooner than later.
Let's do it.
All right, bro.
Let's do it.
And we want to say thank you as well for joining us. We love you so much. We're so grateful for your support of the show, obviously, but we are praying that God would use this show to draw you into greater faith. We desire every listener would grow in their capacity to minister, to believe the Lord at his very word, to trust him for it, and to live out the Great Commission. And so, we want to just use this as an opportunity. We want to promote strong marriages. And so we would love for you to consider being a part of WedStrong next time round. If you're interested in the conversation we had about Mark, and maybe you never got to hear Mark, maybe you never knew Pastor Mark Trotter, we want to highly encourage you to consider purchasing some of the books that he wrote that's invaluable to our ministry. And so if you go to lffellowship.com, you'll find a link there to the Living Faith books, and we've published several of his books and hope to continue to do that. That would be a blessing to you. Obviously, his sermons, if you visit marktrotter.tv, there'll be sermons there. And so, but we're grateful to you, and we're so grateful for the time that you spent with us this week. We love you, and we hope to see you again next week. God bless. Thanks for listening to the Postscript. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and review in order to help other people find our podcast. If you value this show, please help us continue creating content by supporting Living Faith Bible Institute at lfbi.org/support.